Hey guys, Danger here. Tonight I'm going to be talking about a project that I found to be really enjoyable. I worked on this about 6 months ago, and what this was just a simple breakdown of Marksman itemization in League of Legends. We continue to see, and during that time we're seeing a lot of itemization changes, especially because 6 months ago was preseason. And what I noticed was a lot of marksmen that had really traditionally built one way switched to something else. And we see this throughout the history of League of Legends, throughout the history of metas, although tanks seem to kind of build the same thing like pretty much all the time. But that's why I did marksman, because marksman is kind of an interesting deal. So with marksman, we're looking at two big things. Of course, the meta, but also the scaling on the kit itself. And I'll just go through kind of my findings. So what you have is you have a couple different types of builds. You have two crit focused builds. These are the two main crit focused builds. And these go really well when the itemization for these crit items is working. You can actually hit your power spikes when you need to. And the marksman has that scaling. So this is like a Caitlyn or a Sivir that has scaling within their kit specifically related to critical damage that's very important to their damage output. So these builds generally, I'm not going to say always, but I'm going to say generally, they don't change too much simply because the way the kits are designed are often so heavily influenced by this crit chance. So 2 Zeals and an Infinity Edge. That is a damage focused crit build that you see on carries that don't really need any cooldown reduction and just need a lot of damage, and that's the way they do it, and it probably scales with their kit. The second type of crit focused is going to be like your Essence Reaver. So you're basically sacrificing one of your Zeals unless you're crazy and you're like going for 100% crit chance with an IE, an Essence Reaver, and like in 2 Zeals or something. Normally, basically, you're sacrificing one Zeal, so you're sacrificing some attack speed to get an item that allows you to have more cooldown reduction. So we're talking basically 30% cooldown reduction once you get your full crit. So that's going to be really impactful on a kit that wants to reduce some type of important cooldown. And the thing is most AD carries that exclusively build the first damage focused build generally don't switch over to the cooldown reduction build. However, the same cannot be said. A lot of builds that are built with the cooldown reduction build can be built into the more damage focused build simply because the stats are actually comparable. The only main difference is you get more mana with the Essence Reaver build, more attack damage with the Essence Reaver build, and more cooldown reduction, whereas you're getting more of the attack speed. So this is kind of the whole Caitlyn versus Sivir dynamic. Generally, Sivir is someone who builds the Essence Reaver because you want to reduce the cooldown of her spells, her spell shield, her ultimate, her W. You want to be able to get that AoE damage in, whereas in Caitlyn, she's not as interested in making sure that her ult or her E or any of those abilities that don't scale nearly as well as just her auto attacks in general. She wants to make sure that she's just getting as much damage as possible with those auto attacks, because she has that range as well. That's a big part of it. So it's each of the different dynamic parts of these kits that you see heavily influence these builds. And I chose those two champions because they're really staples, I think, of those builds. You don't, or at least I have not recently seen too big of a change. Even with Caitlyn, who's now building a Bork into a Runons, or at least that was true as of right before the mid-season changes happened. Even a champion like Caitlyn still ended up building the 2 Zeal items often and the Infinity Edge. So that's kind of that covers the crit builds, and that would have been fine for a decent amount of time, except Riot keeps introducing more and more stuff, especially lethality. So for a while we had kind of these like really disgusting armor penetration lethality builds, and actually at the time of me making this, I had only vaguely created a category for this, but this is definitely, I mean, it's definitely fallen out of the meta, but I mean, you can still see it with kind of with Lucien. Lucien is still someone who will build, at the very least, will build armor penetration. And that's because his kit doesn't really directly scale with crit chance, so he can really build anything that builds damage and then fits into whatever he's fighting works. That's why I think you saw Lucien as an early adopter of the new Bork that was like really strong and is still really strong, the Bork into the Black Cleaver. Whereas someone like Sivir, who I've seen some Korean games where they do that, Sivir really doesn't have as much just raw damage output and to make that work. Neither does, for instance, Caitlyn. They really want to rely on that crit chance to make that happen. So I think that actually covers, most of the categories. There's a lot of nuances between them. You have your kind of on-hit. Generally, like a Kog'Maw builds like one Zeal item, which is like your Rune-Ons, and then just a whole bunch of on-hit stuff, the Bork, the Rage Blade. And I don't know how much this has changed, again, since the changes to the Zeal items that just happened in the mid-season. I actually have played a couple of games where I just built like Static Shiv and Rune-Ons just because it was a gross amount of damage and I was really, really fed. Instead of doing that Rage Blade, which also is a gross amount of damage, so it probably would have been a better choice. The point being is that those on-hit builds are, they're very, very meta-dependent. It's like whatever is OP at the time for building an on-hit build, that's going to happen. So, and really Kog'Maw, I would say Kog'Maw is really the only AD carry that right now fits into that category. And you could maybe count like a Kennen AD carry at that point, building the Rune-Ons and the Wit's End, and that's more of an on-hit top lane Kennen. But I would say, he's still kind of secondary marksman, so he would still fit into this category. So the Ezreal, I think I may have just mentioned that, but the Ezreal, I call that kind of like the retro build. Build Tear the Goddess, and then Tear the Goddess and a Triforce or a Frozen Fist. And Ezreal is generally the only champion to do that, but we have seen in the past other champions build the Triforce. And I would say that most of the other champions that build the Triforce opt for more of what I call like the Slayer build. So like we've seen Vayne like with Gosu did this with the Youmuu's Ghostblade and the Triforce, which is just like a really gross combination. And as each of these items kind of fall out of the meta, you kind of see them shift back to what I would call like their original build paths. And each champion that has an original build path often doesn't deviate too much from that build path. Just like I talked about in the beginning with the different type of crit champions, you don't see the champion that exclusively has been building the damage, i.e. 2 Zeals. You don't see that switch to the Essence Reaver that often. You'd probably see them more switch to this kind of, if they were to do this, and they're more of like the mobile, rather than Caitlyn, more of like the Vayne, who often builds the IE and the 2 Zeal items. Although it doesn't always have to build the IE, that sometimes can fall somewhat in that kind of on-hit category. I'd say kind of. I've definitely seen Rageblade on Vayne. I don't think it's that good, I guess. But again, it's very meta-reliant. But that category can often slip into the Slayer category, and the Tear the Goddess category, the Tear the Goddess category can sometimes slip into the armor penetration category. You're looking at like a Varus who is building like the Tear the Goddess and then the armor penetration as well. And a lot of those kind of like in-between builds are very, very meta-dependent. And it's obviously a lot of these are meta-dependent. I've said that like a bajillion times, and it's very obvious to anyone who's played League. I've also said the word obvious like a bajillion times. But the point is that I just think it's really cool to see how each champion has kind of like these scaling points, and how quickly challenger players are amazing, like they have amazing minds for this stuff, because it doesn't take them like any time to go through this. They're like, oh, this item just got changed, well, I know this about this kit, so this is going to be really OP on this character, and they just do it. Whereas like for me, I'm like, alright, I'm like super boosted, like I need to understand like how do all these kits work together. So the main thing is I made a chart for it, which I was pretty happy about, and there's a really dynamic one that had, links between each of the elements. Oh, here's the crit build with 2 Zeals. Oh, here's 1 Zeal attaches to 1 Ghostblade equals Slayer build. 1 Ghostblade attaches to Tear the Goddess equals the retro Varus build. I'm trying to move my hands out of the way of my face. one Triforce attaches to this Slayer build, but this Triforce attaches to the Tear of the Goddess Ezreal build. I didn't say Ezreal build, but it's basically just an Ezreal build. The one Infinity Edge with only Bloodthirsters attaches to Draven. Okay, again, I said a champion, but that's not really the point. The point is that there's a lot of different strengths between each champion, and it's just cool to see those trends. So, alright, that's it for the video. I may or may not put the image. Eventually, I'll make a more concise version of this. I'll make a more concise version of probably most of the things that I tried to explain at 3:25 in the morning. Good times. So, yep, that's it for this video, and I'm just going to upload this right now. Alright, Danger out.